Greetings there, Clariphiles. In this video, I'd like to give a presentation on what I call a reed finishing workflow. Now, almost anything that you do anymore, there's a recommended workflow that you do this first, and then that next, and then that next, and that gives you the best result when you combine all these processes. And if you do them out of order, then you don't get the desired result that you would like to get. So before we do the reed finishing workflow, though, I want to define what a balanced reed is. You know, a lot of people say you have to have a balanced reed, but what is a balanced reed? Can you give me some concrete information, some specific information, so that I better know whether I have a balanced reed or not? So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to define a balanced reed. Now, a balanced reed is a reed that plays equally on left and right side, so it's balanced side to side, and it's also a reed that plays with the proper even response throughout the registers, which means that the proportions from tip to back that is going down the heart of the reed are very, very good. So it's a side-to-side balance, but it's also a tip-to-back balance. And so what are the order in which you do these things? I'm still wanting to jump ahead of myself. Let's talk about exactly some things that people are always concerned with, like measurements. Some people are obsessed with measuring reeds. It's just so many thousandths here, and then measure another few millimeters down, and so many. It's nonsense, because you're not fitting the reed to some abstract set of numbers or ideas. They may be good, they may get you in a ballpark in some mouthpieces, but specifically, you're fitting the reed to the mouthpiece. It's a very existential process. You're fitting this reed to that mouthpiece right now to perform certain functions in an optimal sense, okay? You're always fitting the reed, not to an abstraction up there in your mind with a set of numbers or whatever. You're fitting the reed to something specific, the resistance facing of a particular given mouthpiece. Now, it's much easier, I'll say, if you have a symmetrically faced mouthpiece. And in fact, it's been my experience that crooked mouthpieces, that is, asymmetrically faced mouthpieces, are virtually impossible to raise a reed to a high degree of refined balance. Okay, so we've established basically a basic definition of a balanced reed. A balanced reed is a reed that plays with the same resistance, response, and resonance on left and right sides, or right corners, or ears, or whatever you want to call them, of the reed, and is also has the right proportions from tip to back, so that you have an even fluid response throughout all the registers. And when that happens, you can play low, high, and loud and soft with a minimum of embouchure air pressure exchange. So, in other words, you can be maximally efficient behind your nose and get the maximum amount of pitch and dynamic range. Okay, that's a tall order. It really quite is. And you have to learn to test for it. In my ATG system, you'll find all that information on how to test for low, high, and loud and soft, and how to learn how to do that and do it in a more refined way, which is what you need. You just can't do it in some crude way and get the right results, because your ability to test is essentially your diagnostic tool. I mean, if you were a doctor and you had the best operating materials and whatever else that you have, and the prettiest nurses and all that, it wouldn't matter if you couldn't diagnose what was actually wrong with the patient. So the better you test, I always say, the less you guess. So testing the reed for side-to-side balance, for tip-to-back balance, and all that's very critical. It's very critical that your mechanics be correct and your testing be very refined and sensitive behind your nose. And that's something that has to be practiced, and practiced diligently, just like you would practice anything else on the clarinet, scales or arpeggios or rhythms or whatever. Now, the other thing is that the means that you use to work on the reed or adjust the reed so that the resistances and responses and all that are equalized, you need a tool or some kind of means that will create these equalizations without any deviations in the reed. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is simply this, that the reed is a spring form, and spring forms transfer energy. Like a diving board, for instance, transfers energy back and forth. When you jump on it, the energy rolls back and forth on the diving board, and the diving board resists it. That's why eventually that the diving board comes to a stasis, reaches some kind of stability. So that's very easy to see. The diving board is an even thickness all the way through, as far as I know, and therefore it would produce very even kinds of resistance to the energy that's applied to it. Now, the reed is not a simple spring form like the diving board. The reed is a complex spring form, so energy travels slower as it goes toward the back of the reed, toward the end of the vamp, the beginning of the vamp, and then it moves faster because the reed is, of course, obviously thinner, okay? But imagine if you had a diving board, and the diving board, instead of being an even thickness, what if it had a weak spot in the middle of it somewhere? A deviation or perturbation or whatever you want to call it. I used to call it a gouge, okay? But no, when you work on the reed by removing material from the back toward the tip with your hands with a knife or something like that, you almost always create some kind of deviation. It may not be a gouge in the surface, but it will be something that's going to make the movement of the energy rolling up and down the reed somehow uneven. If it hits a weaker spot or a slight deviation, then the energy is going to travel with a different kind of resistance than it did before. Well, that's going to degrade your response. So even if you get the resistance equal, your response is going to be degraded. Now, in the ATG system, the tool that I invented for removing material on the reed completely eliminates the need to develop a high degree of skill. And it's almost impossible. No matter how skilled you are, you're going to create some deviations and perturbations in the contour of the reed, and that's going to affect the energy flow. And remember, the reed is a spring form, and energy flow is everything for a regular, predictable, even response. So whatever tool you use, you've got to be able to create not only equalize, say, the mass from one side to the other, but you also have to create a beautiful, undeviated, perfectly smooth contour that's going to give you that really great, high-quality response out of the reed, as well as equalizing the resistance. I think my tool does it, the ATG tool does it better than anything I've ever seen. I can actually close my eyes and create that beautiful contour. And when I used to work with a knife all the time, it was treachery from beginning to end. And the closer I got to the tip, the worse. So with this system, the easier it is to produce a really perfectly beautiful reed. Okay, well, having said that, it's quite a few words, but I hope you'll go over it and think about it and reflect on it so that you get a good idea of what balanced reed is and what's really required in balancing the reed. Okay, so we find ourselves here talking about the reed finishing workflow. When you approach the reed, first you wet the reed up. There's no need to baby the reed by then. Don't spend days wetting it and drying it and wetting it. That's nonsense, okay? There's what I call the camels and the gnats, okay? And lots of people are choking on gnats and swallowing camels. Fix the camels and the gnats will virtually disappear. So that's my philosophy, and that's the way it's worked out for me. And I think if you do that and learn to do that, you'll find that the same thing. So anyway, the gnats are like wetting the reed and sanding or making sure that it's perfectly flat and rubbing it down and putting it to bed at night and whatever people do to baby reeds and all that. That's just foolishness. Okay, that doesn't fix the camels, and the camels are the gross imbalances and lack of proportion in the reed surface. Let's solve those things first, okay, and then worry about the gnats, because those are the big camels. So how do you approach the reed finishing workflow? First of all, you just test the reed generally and get an idea of just how hard it is, how much resistance it gives you, and then perform the side-to-side test. Now, what's the side-to-side test? Is you're testing resonance decay on the left and the right sides, and make sure that the reed is put on very, very well, very even, because you want to balance the reed so it plays straight up. Now, you're always in your final testing, say for performance or whatever, you're going to be moving the reed in very, very slight increments to get the maximum response and comfort out of the way the reed sits on the mouthpiece. So basically, when you're doing this side-to-side test and when you're testing for balance, initially when you're finishing the reed, the process is really the same for playing the reed when you're going to perform. But again, you're trying to perform and get the reed as straight up as possible. You don't have to be moving the reed way off to one side, way off to one side or the other. That's really counterproductive. If the reed is properly balanced, it's generally speaking going to play extremely straight up on the mouthpiece. Balance it straight up, it'll play straight up. Okay, so we put it up straight up, and then we do our side-to-side test. We test the left ear and the right ear. Now, they should have the same resistance, the same response, and the same resonance decay. And I recommend, I don't care what you play, I recommend highly that you learn to test this double lip, because single lip players kill the resonance and response of the reed, and they never give you a true reading of how the reed is really playing on the facing of the mouthpiece. So that's my recommendation. You can disregard it. I've had so many people say, I tried your side-to-side test. It didn't work for me. And I said, really? Did you try a double lip? Well, no, but try double lip. Learn to test it double lip without killing the reed, so you can really hear how the reed is ringing on that rail. You'll never get a true assessment of how the reed actually interfaces with the facing as long as you're biting and crunching down on the reed. Okay, so having said that, you do the side-to-side test. And the next thing you do is that you're going to find out the hard side of the reed. But I'd say after you test generally how hard the reed is, I would do a tip finishing just on the first 10 or 12 millimeters of the reed with a very light abrasive. And then I'd retest. You're still not going to change so much if the left and right side are not in proper proximity. You're still going to get that one side is harder than the other. So the next thing that you would do is that, because you can't add material to the softer side or lighter side, you're going to have to take down the harder side. And I'd recommend using tip finishing techniques number 2 and number 3 as you need to try to get the energy to flow left and right exactly the same way, with the same resonance, resistance, and the same response, resistance, and resonance decay. And when you get those things still well in balance, then you're going to be able to properly test to see, more generally what the proportions of the reed are from tip to back. We're going to talk about that next. So to help explain what I'm talking about in terms of balancing the reed from tip to back, I'm going to show you this drawing. And you'll notice that it divides the reed surfaces into three areas: the tip area, the midsection, and the low section. This sort of corresponds to video, where you have lows, mids, and highs. But with the reed, what you want to do when you're testing, after the reed is properly balanced, it plays a lot better. But you're going to need to get certain things out of the reed to make it really, really feel and play and sound like an artistic, something worthy of artistic performance. So these three areas here I've set off to help you understand exactly what's trying to be accomplished here. And the process primarily is going to be finishing the reed from tip to back, right down the middle of the reed, or the heart of the reed. That part of the reed, they say, oh, don't ever touch that. That's bad. Like, don't, you ruin it. No, forget about that, okay? You're going to have to fix the resistance and proportional relationship between the tip of the reed and the rest of the body of the reed in order to get that fluid, even response, again, so you can play low, high, and loud and soft with a minimum of embouchure air pressure exchange. In other words, you can play with maximum efficiency and get the maximum result. Okay, so I've set these areas off because where the lines are drawn, so to speak, the connections between the midsection and the tip, and the midsection and the lower section, these areas need to be blended perfectly in a perfect contour. And again, no deviations, no perturbations. You need a perfectly smooth contours, and that means when you flex the reed in the light, you're going to see this beautiful, uninterrupted flex that as the tip flexes, as the top section flexes into the middle section. It's going to be really beautiful. It's going to be, like this perfect arc, and that continues on down from the bottom of the middle section into the top of the lower section. And you're going to work right in the middle of the reed. Don't work on the sides. Don't touch the sides. You've already fixed the sides. The sides are working fine. They're balanced fine. Now work in those areas, blending the tip into the mid and the mid into the back, and then retest. Now, what should you be feeling for when you retest? Well, first of all, check your side-to-side balance. You always want to do that because you could always miss something that just didn't stand out before will stand out now. So you're always refining that side-to-side balance while you're doing everything else. But what you're looking for is, first of all, the reed should feel like when you're removing the heart gradually, the reed should begin to feel like the tip of the reed and the tip of the mouthpiece are right there, so that you can simply hold the mouthpiece and seal with the air. When you put air into it, it speaks and the sound is clear. You don't have to muscle it, you don't have to crunch it or anything. It's just ready to speak, okay? Just put the mouthpiece and reed in your mouth like you normally do. Except if you bite, don't bite, for heaven's sake. And then you simply seal, make a nice firm seal on the mouthpiece, no closure at all. And if anything, you're going to maybe roll in a little bit, but you're not putting a lot of energy behind your nose on that. You're just sealing to keep the air from escaping. And you should feel that the tip of the reed is right there to speak and is right there to respond, okay? And you need to keep working the center from the mid to the from the tip to the middle, from the middle to the back, until you get that really good ringing quality. Now, removing more wood between the bottom third and the mid third, you're going to begin to get some clearer response in the long pipe clarion notes, and that's very critical because it'll make playing the balance from the chalumeau to the second register much easier once you get that resistance right. And then once you get the resistance right, the proportions right between the tip and the midsection, you're going to find that the response of everything clarifies, everything gets quicker and clearer, yet you still have good resistance. And the sound's going to begin to have what I call some sparkle, all right? And it'll have that anomalous characteristic of both being dark and deep and yet bright and ringing, okay? And those are the real keys that a really great reed is going to respond instantly. It's going to have a deep and resonant sound, not a dull sound, okay? That's not dark, that's just dumb, okay? A dark ringing sound, it's always got to be ringing. And the reed should have a little bit of sparkle, okay? And so it has a good, beautiful, proper proportion. So you work the reed side to side, make sure the tip is even. And generally speaking, you're going to find that the ears of the reed are slightly thinner on the very ears than the very center of the reed. But you work the tip and the sides until the side to side is balanced and the response feels good. And then you work the proportions of tip to middle to back with your tool right down the center of the reed, not touching the sides, because that's a can of worms. Don't do that, but work right into the center until you adjust so that you get a beautiful response and relationship throughout the clarinet with through all the registers, nice and clear, ringing and resonant, okay? And that way you'll have a reed that will speak for you, and that you can actually, I'm always looking for a reed that has some sparkle and some even response, and that troubles me very little in terms of its evenness throughout the registers, so that I can actually begin to sing through the clarinet and sort of forget about the reed. And this is the process I use when I'm working on my reeds, and I've got more reeds than you can shake a stick at. A big stick, okay? So I hope this workflow will help you. And I'm going to include a link with this video that's going to give you a little PDF of that workflow. And hopefully it will help you. I'm going to be talking about this a lot more when I can finally get time to release my double lip videos that really take a lot of time, and I wish I had a lot of time to produce it more quickly. But we plan to do it, and hopefully we shall. But in the meantime, use this workflow. Test it, try it, and see how it works for you. And as always, hey, thanks for listening. And if you like this video and you haven't subscribed, subscribe, because there are going to be more videos like this. If you don't like this video, show your disapproval by hitting the dislike button twice.